Roman society was built on male-dominant rule. The pater familias, the oldest male member, was the sole owner of family possessions, and even the possessions of his children and grandchildren. He decided who his children would marry, and marriages could be dissolved easily. Middle class or higher class married women supervised the children and the household. And so therefore Roman costume signified rank and status, office and authority, with different men ranked higher than other men and their households behind them. Textiles were mostly made of wool, being the most common fiber, but they also included flax, being the second most common, and then other types of fabrics as well, such as linen. These could be gauze-like or tightly woven. There's a high level of skill involving fabrics. And silk and cotton were imported, especially at the height of the empire. They were also using blends for the first time. So they would blend cotton and linen, wool and cotton, and silk and linen. Upper-class men specifically adhered to manners and customs of the imperial court and belonged to one of the civil or military orders. Senators were the most important, and knights, for lack of a better word, the equestrian orders, were ranked second. Here we're looking at a toga, and so people often think that Greeks were wearing togas. As we already discussed, they were wearing chymations, which are different. Toga has a very specific connotation and rank, and it also has a specific method of being tied. So a toga, as you're seeing in this image, has multiple pieces of fabric sometimes, or one very, very large piece of fabric that is wrapped in an elaborate way. Think of the way that when you wrap your bath towel around you in the morning, if you do that, how it stays in place because of the tension. This was that, except for many more times around the body. It doesn't mean that it still wouldn't ride to some degree and restrict movement, but it would be, but there's a reason why upper classes specifically and full citizens would wear this garb as a symbol of status. So there's multiple kinds of togas. So specifically, there's the toga pura, which was an unbleached natural color wool that would be worn by any citizen, maybe not at all times, but they had the right to wear this. There's also the toga praetexta. The toga praetexta is a senatorial toga with a white band. That was white with a burgundy band, red band around it. The other kinds of togas, the toga pula, would be black, and that was meant for mourning. The tona candida, which was for candidates specifically, it was plain white. Candidates for office. The toga picta, which was decorated and embroidered, and this was for generals and governors. The tunic tuleris, which was long sorry, I haven't gotten the tunics yet. There's also, so Roman senators wore shoes with laces that wrapped around the leg halfway to the knee. So here are some, this would specifically be for Roman senators, but there are also different kinds of sandals and shoes. The city itself was disgusting. People would just pour their waste out of windows onto the cobbles below, and there were certainly spaces in the cobbles to create rivulets of sewage, but in general, people walking around the city, if they could afford to cover their feet, they would. The equestrian orders, really any citizen, would wear a tunic underneath their clothing. Only citizens could wear tunics that had two red lines on them, also known as clavi. So clavi is the plural, clavus is the singular, and so this brings us to two different kinds of tunics. The tunic tuleris was long to the floor and signified a higher rank or old age. And the tunic palmata was highly embroidered. The most simple tunic with clavi would look fairly similar to this, although this is not a quality garment. The equestrian orders themselves would wear bronze armor if they could, with a which is called a cuirass, C-U-I-R-A-S-S-E, with a leather jacket below that. Those of lower rank would wear a shorter cape. This was called an abala, A-B-O-L-L-A. Generals and magistrates would wear a purple, larger cape called a palamentium. When not dressed in full armor, people would wear their tunics with some kind of cape over them, hats, whatnot. It would look similar to this. And anyone who was not a citizen, such as foreigners, would wear the clothing of their native land. So it must have been quite a melting pot with that many foreigners, with the white toga standing out of the citizens. Slaves wore brownish tunics in general. There was a few exceptions to the toga. So freeborn boy or girl children could wear togas with purple borders until they reached puberty. For girls, that would be around 12. For boys, that would be around 14. They would also, so boys specifically, would also wear tunics with the clavi. I'm going to show you part of Rome where we see a young Augustus wearing his tunic, and then when he becomes a man, he's able to don the toga. After the rule of Augustus, a toga on a woman meant she was a prostitute, or it could mean that she was divorced for infidelity. And the wrapping for those cases would be more informal than the very clear formal wrap that I showed you earlier on men. Women's clothing consisted more of three parts. So the outermost layer would be the stola. This could only be worn by free married women. So this is the black part you're seeing in the drawing here. So that's going over top of an under tunic. And this one looks particularly like the sort of Ionic style that we're seeing, although it has more of a sleeve to it. The women would also be expected to wear a palla around her. So this would be sort of an outer garment. Think of it more like a coat. It sort of would be wrapped around her body. Here we see three statues of married noble women. The statuary always has the palla, not always, but generally has the palla pooled around these women. You can see their different gestures have different qualities. So the first one is a large Herculaneum woman. So this was discovered in Herculaneum, made of terracotta. This type pulls the mantle diagonally across her chest with one hand, while the other hand remains. The middle statue is named for the Roman word for chastity. This type is characterized by the straight jacket position of the arms, one crossed her body at the waist, the other is perpendicular to it and raised to the face. Also, often a woman in this style is wearing a veil, further emphasizing her chastity and modesty. Women were expected to wear veils and have their pulla wrapped around their head before they left the house. The last type is essentially the same, although she doesn't have the pulla wrapped around her head in this particular version. Here is a photo series of a woman being dressed by one of her servants. The stola itself inspires a lot of disagreement between costume scholars. Some think that there may have been a ruffle at the feet. Some think it was a dress suspended with sewed-on straps like a modern slip, but made with fuller fabric and distinctive folds. The Mater Familias would wear a specific kind of hairstyle. This designated that she was the head of the household, married to the Pater Familias. And this would happen as soon as her husband became Pater Familias. She would wear her hair in the tutulus, which is this. Here is a modern day woman wearing what she thinks is the recreation of the stola over the interior tunica with the palla around her. Hairstyles became quite elaborate. There's a video, an optional video on there. It's actually a whole series of a woman who calls herself a hair archaeologist. So she has videos that can be quite long, but she tried to recreate the hairstyles that she finds in Roman research. These are quite elaborate. And so she actually sews the hair to get it to sit properly on a woman's head. And so it's pretty interesting. Check it out if you're really into Roman hairstyles. If you don't have time, that's fine too. Another item that women would wear wrapped around their head would be a woolen band to bind their hair called a vita. This particular picture comes from the Vestal Virgin series that video that she does recreating a Vestal Virgin's hairstyle based on research. And for funsies, since I know you all love Lucy Lawless, here is a completely historically inaccurate picture from Spartacus Blood and Sand. But isn't it gorgeous? Look at the pheasant feathers. I mean, it's just crazy beautiful. Just bask. Bask in Lucy Lawless. Okay, moving forward. Here is Rome HBO. We can see these different kinds of togas. These are simply worn diagonally, not tied in the toga fashion, over tunics. But you'll get to see a lot more of this as we look at the Rome HBO show. We're going to jump around quite a bit because it is extremely violent at times. A few more notes on things that Roman accessories specifically. When people are in mourning, they would wear a black square cloak for a year. There were multiple fans, handbags, sunshades, hats, parasols, handkerchiefs, napkins. People brought their own napkins when they went to someone else's house for dinner, and so they would be as much a part of your ensemble as anything else. And they used cosmetics lavishly by both women and men. Women would whiten their skin with lead because that was extremely healthy for them, and they would tint their lips red. They would darken their eyebrows. Men would put cream on their cheeks, and they fabric pasted on to cover up some of their facial imperfections. Everyone would wear perfume because it was a very smelly time, and everyone needs perfume when it's very smelly. Even though there was lots of bathing, there were still bad smells and, inadequate sewage. As the decline of the empire occurred around 3rd century AD, this was largely due to the flawed quality and competence of the emperors. There was military anarchy. The Roman Empire potentially spread a little too far, a little too fast, and started using soldiers of native lands to protect itself, who did not have loyalty specifically to Rome. There was multiple civil wars. There was a failure of economy, a general collapse of Roman society, and the migration of the German tribes into the empire in search of land and provisions didn't help. So the one thing I would like to take a moment to discuss is some of the shifts in Roman statuary. In the first century first century CE, we have Augustus of Prima Portia. And this is probably not the original. There's probably a bronze version first. It really sort of shows the stately way that Roman emperors were presented with their elaborate cuirass that they would wear. Really, Roman statuary tends to be about highlighting political figures and showing them as heroes. And not so much on the ideals of beauty that we saw in the Greek era. There's also a pretty interesting shift in Roman portraiture of nobles that had to do with what we call illusionism, which sounds like you would be creating an illusion. Well, you are creating an illusion of realism. So this particular statue, Trajan Decius, you really see some of his real facial features. So you see that his skin is pitted in certain places, and that his beard, or if that's his beard, is sort of patchy. He's got, really sort of shows that he's got, patches under his eyes. It is the sort of true realism, rather than trying to show him as an ideal version of himself, what he actually looks like, and the nobility of being who you are, essentially. This is a phase of specifically Roman portraiture. As the Roman Empire becomes more lavish and a little out of control, we have Nero. Nero created for himself a 30-meter 100-foot tall bronze statue resembling himself as the Roman sun god Sol. He holds the rudder on the globe, which is a symbolic gesture of his power over land and sea. This is an artist's impression, since no images have actually survived to the present day, but there's many descriptions of this. This is from a National Geographic magazine. The thing about the bottom of this is the statue was eventually moved to in front of the Colosseum, and you can see that the height of the Colosseum compared to what the actual statue was. So it's almost as tall as the Colosseum. And this is also a comparison of the Statue of Liberty to which is 111 feet, to this Colossus. So it was made of bronze. Depending on how accurate they are here with this, I think it looks almost like kind of modernistic, right? But this really sort of begins the true sort of glorification of the emperor. Not begins, but it really is sort of the height of the glorification of the emperor. Whereas the statue of Augustus is tasteful and sort of realistic in certain ways. This is extremely aggrandized. And this trend continues into the Colossus of Constantine. And this is where I'm going to leave this discussing of the Romans, because this is where Constantine in the 4th century decides to move the capital of the empire to Constantinople, 325 AD. This particular statue is made of marble, and it was clear that the artist was not interested in how he looked, but in portraying his godlike power. So specifically, you start to see a stylized version of this face, right? This is very stylized. It's elongated. It has kind of odd, detailed eyes. It's not necessarily a real face, but it's clearly done with competency. It's not that they couldn't create a realistic face; it's that they artistically chose not to. So clearly, the interest of getting things realistic is giving way to spiritual and symbolic representation. At the base of this statue, there's a plaque that says, "Through the sign of salvation, which is the true symbol of goodness, I rescued your city and freed it from the tyrant's yoke. And through my act of liberation, I restored the Senate and the people of Rome to their ancient renown and splendor." So this really does illustrate the abandonment of illusionistic realism in favor of awesome size, grandeur, and mystical power. So with the construction of the new capital in the eastern portion of the empire around 325 AD, we see two Roman emperors, one for the east and one for the west. In the west, a German chieftain had begun to establish German kingdoms, one of whom deposed the last emperor in 426 CE. Sorry, I keep saying AD, but I'm trying to switch over to CE, which means Common Era. In the Eastern Empire remained wealthy and secure and grew into the Byzantine Empire, which we will cover next week.